Jota I janaki koya. Jota kosha I chokoya kasha I. Jahonoya, Jahonoya. It's coming into these ranges. Let's also open up Dokosha I. Dropping into these ranges, Dokosha I. Where we are interconnected, Dokosha I. So almost like a story within a story, Kosha I Chataki. These ranges within the field that are overlapped through the outlines here, Kosha I Chataki. Joho Koya. Again, we're seeing this almost as like a stepped pyramid. I almost feel as if I'm looking up from underneath it. So if you can imagine the first level of that square, it would have a center in it. So that inner square then becomes the base for the next square above it. Kosha I chokoya. This is what we're talking about, this overlapping, this geometry within a geometry, or a story within a story, or the narrative within the narrative. Kosha I chokoya. As we are coming in to dismantle Kosha I chakai. This lockdown, which creates an inability to clearly see, to clearly understand. Chokoya. Okay, I'm feeling this through the front of the chest, actually almost into the bones. It creates a bit of I'm seeing two kind of half arcs, Chokosha I, where the arcs are back to back. So almost I can imagine this lying right through the chest here, Kosha I chakai. And that's interesting, the use of words there. Chokosha I chakaya. In terms of Kosha I, this expression of lying in terms of false Kosha I stories, or how stories have been built upon these presumptions. Chokosha I, is the underlying presumption even true? Does it even apply? Kosha I here. Kosha I shahoy, feeling this through the left shoulder blade. And this is really, really intense dismantling of energies. If the human is aware of this on any level, it can be incredibly frightening, let's say to some degree, this reality, or as we start to understand how realities co-combine and co-create and intertwine. Kosha I chokoya. So let's just bring your source light here to the front of the chest and the base of the brain and the front of the mind as well, because this does start to affect into the mind as the human, let's say the human components begin to become aware, Kosha I, of these deeper underlying energetic interactions. Chokosha I chakai. And so rather than panicking, there's a sense of needing to really allow the human to step back, whereas in the past there may have been this tendency to want to communicate, to want to sort this out in a very physical way. Let's just say, as an example, in a relationship, Dokosha I, it's always been said communication is the best. This is the thing that resolves, and yet it's actually so complicated that the communication will only make it worse. Because especially if we are somewhat aware, the other party is not aware, they receive it in such a way that it can trigger shame, it can trigger these wounded spots, rather than being able to get to the core of the interlocking of the energies. Chokosha, and this has essentially always been the issue, and yet we're seeing it so clearly defined here, Kosha I. And this panic that is coming up through the front of the chest is really, it feels over the top, but yet we can see, because it's held so deeply in the body, this way of living. Kosha I chakaya. It's quite unsettling, almost as if the body is jittery, Kosha I, agitated, anxious, Chokosha I, and doesn't know why. Kosha o kosha na I chiakai. Bringing source light here into this, I keep getting it into the bones, but it's almost like a shield here. Kosha I keep seeing it like this will protect me, and yet, so fascinating. This is actually what is causing so much of the alarm, and yet I also see the word disarming, alarming. Jokosha I chataki shahoya. So really this massive confusion because the energies are so embedded in the emotional plane. Okay. So bringing source light into this, it's really the left side. I don't know that it's even the feminine range, but it feels like this arc here is, I keep wanting to say a reversed arc. It's pinned into the field here. Oh, wow. To come in here, it creates this, almost what I would describe when you have this kind of triggering of the nervous system, this panic and this alarm. So let's come in here. As if this has been like bent inward. So if we release this pin, it almost pops out because the pressure, the force upon it has been so great. It's like it hasn't been held in its natural position here. That pressure. Okay, good. It really affects into the brainstem here. Okay, good. So just bringing source light to assist with this release of panic. And the beautiful thing is, as we step back from physically trying to intervene, this allows, let's say, the other party, where we are energetically crossing paths, it allows them to feel the full effect of what is happening in order to resolve it. And yet we can see how this may have been described almost as like a codependency, where we're able to kind of intervene on another's behalf, although it never really would have resolved the issue anyhow. So just to point out that the massive kind of panic and anxiousness that this is causing is not, it will pass. It's an unfortunate and necessary reaction to this release. This is ahead of time. I just got this massive hit, because also what I wanted to say with this is like, oh, it's a heads up. So here, again, we're going back to this specific, well, I don't know, it's a specific type of soul, but in this kind of soul in particular picks up on the energetics before it gets, let's say, played out or triggered in the physical. So we can almost say, oh, we're getting a heads up about the situation, but also where this causes confusion because it's actually ahead of the time, or ahead of the time when it actually happens or occurs or is pertinent. And this is what I have absolutely been noticing, the need to hold back and to wait and to pause as I become aware of all of these energies in order to allow it to, it's almost like taking in a bunch of energy and then waiting for it to create this picture to fully understand what's happening. So this grand kind of pause or pullback, where almost it's as if, yeah, and that's where the brainstem comes in, because it almost feels like we've also been pinned, or the fields have been manipulated in such a way. Okay, so those that hold this capacity have also been manipulated in such a way as the brainstem has been pinned in a placement where, let's say, I'm feeling and thinking all of these things and assuming they must be about something that's happening in the moment, and they're not. And yet the brainstem, there was something done that was causing this, or making it very difficult to be aware of the fact that this was really information that was necessary or required once we did come upon this specific point in time. But this seems to be a natural running way of being. Like, this is always like this. This kind of divergent tone here. Well, it's divergent to what we might describe as being a quote-unquote normal human. And everyone has this capacity, and yet there are, we'll call them forerunners, but really what it is this is innate in their fields. And as they learn how to assess and work with this range here, now this is all coming in through the masculine range, as they learn to work with it effectively here in this material plane, it will eventually start to pass. Let's say it's almost like it bleeds out into the collective. it infiltrates or infuses through the collective. Okay, now let's clear that really kind of distorted, bleeding out tone, because that has a bit of this like martyrdom victim range to it, where somehow these fields have felt incredibly used, yes, as a result of this. So again, this has been naturally occurring the whole time. It's just that the mechanics of it were really challenging to understand once you are within this human activation, or within this human body. Okay, bringing source light through the back of the core, where the field almost starts to feel separate from itself. Good, resolving through the solar plexus, almost where the field has been disowning this about its own self. Oh my goodness. And yet we can see the past stories and narratives where if there were, let's say, insights or premonitions, that would have been used against these fields. Wow. This is so much of what is currently being experienced here. Having things twisted and turned back on the field. Okay, good. These density markers. Okay, wow. This is so brilliant that we're seeing this. Okay, so let's bring source light here to the front of the chest, to the back of the right side of the base of the brain, into the center of the brain, the center of the mind, as you come to know yourself as this powerful range of being, and yet also understanding up until this time, there was massive, let's say, interference, which was making it incredibly challenging to even understand how all of this worked within the human body. Okay, so it's beyond compassion. It is this almost a sense of reparations, resolving. Yes, there is massive evidence and reason here why you would have misunderstood yourself, why you would have berated yourself, why you would have tortured yourself, why you have felt so incredibly confused about yourself, how others have pointed the finger to you, at you, even blamed you for your own struggles and disempowerment. This black seed here in the back of the right side of the heart, as this is floating to the surface now. No longer will we take this blame or this fall for humanity. And yet it's almost like it's been placed here to allow, somewhere there was a desire to allow humanity to not have to see the effects of its own power, which then distortedly gets translated into this, let's say, sense of empathic codependency. But it's all incredibly interwoven and complex. So let's bring source light to this backside of the heart. It's almost like it's moving and it's hidden. By knowing the sensation, by knowing the experience of it now, we have pinpointed this unfairness. It starts to look like a black ring that has almost like these filaments that feel like they can leech onto or leech into the field, where we have these integral intentions, where we are wanting to bring in the power of our source field here, to anchor, to resolve, to assist, feeling this within the masculine heart range so strongly, powerfully, but also the pain that this has caused. And as we come in here, also picking up on the massive confusion and fog this has caused. It has caused, but also the cost of this has been very great. So dropping in here to acknowledge, validate, witness this manipulation and confusion that has been felt within the mind, within the mental planes of reality. in order to loosen, to release this warping. It's almost like there's a ring in the mind. It reminds me of when you have something in the washing machine on the spin cycle and it's imbalanced. It could be a small imbalance, but the more you increase the speed, the larger the effect of the imbalance, as it spins through the field. So let's come into this left hip and the back of the left side of the heart, where the spin of the field has been affected. Or let's say the affect through the field has been compromising the field integrity. Oh, interesting. Oh man, I felt that. Because as you are attempting to stay within your integrity and these things are spinning out and not having the true effect it should, there is this then need to maneuver, which from the outside it would say, well, it looks like manipulation or it looks like this or that, but it's not. Spiraling out effect through the field. Okay, this is really, really good to see this. I know it's not miraculous, and yet if we look at where we are compared to a year ago, it is miraculous, the progress that has been made. For the human, at least, from the human perspective, it is miraculous. Energetically so, and this is where we are learning to release within our own selves. It could seem a bit simplistic, and yet so profound here. And this is the point where we have to, every time we try to bring an energy here, to say, wow, look at how much you have struggled. And then look at how much you have berated your own self. And look at how much damage this has caused. And allow the realization of this to really help you release the ways that you may have learned to torture yourself in order to arrive where you knew you were supposed to be. Okay. It's all a product of this system, and yet I suppose the closest word would be forgiveness, absolution, but yes, reparation, for the self, good. Let's expand through the horizontal ranges to continue to allow this healing. Healing, we can interchange these words. Healing is knowing, knowing is healing. That's what healing is. It's the desire to see, to know clearly. And where in our own fear we start to lock ourselves down. We don't want to know because we don't know that we can resolve. We don't know what the next step would be, and yet that's the very thing that can keep things locked in place here. This is a massive retrieval here through the fields. This solar passage is complete. Oh, good. And let's release the looping through the top of the heart as these keys are restored through the fields. This timeline management. Okay, let's come into the solar plexus here. Feeling responsible for time, the intermixing of time ranges as we interact with others. Coming in through the center of the heart here. Just allowing the heart light to infuse here, actually at the brainstem, the base of the brain, into the skull. Releasing this wobble and imbalance. These energies that create wobble and imbalance through the mind. Good, and just starting to look at this separation that has been through the field for this specific type of soul range. Bringing light here into these chambers. Allowing the release of these barriers now as the atmosphere is much more conducive. Koshai Chakaya. It's almost as if we could imagine this body is housing a variety of different kinds of souls within it. Koshai, or it's not totally clear, but I think even just the human language doesn't extend enough to what's really going on here. What it looked like was as if each part needed a specific type of atmosphere to live or breathe in, right? And so what seems to have happened now is there's been a reconfiguration of an atmosphere that is conducive to all of these parts. And so therefore then these barriers can be dropped. And these parts can have, well, it comes through as have more benevolent access now. It's like they can all stand within the same space in the same room and exchange more freely, because it doesn't look like a merge that's happening here. But it may have been experienced through the human as even fighting within one's own self. As if you have your own counsel, and yet every different consciousness had a different opinion. And they were all at odds with one another. So it's like this atmospheric convergence here, which is really, really wonderful. And it releases so much tension through the top of the heart as your vessel also starts to pick up on this capability. It feels much more safe, much more secure, much more confident, much more at home. Acknowledging the feeling of being disturbed or feeling at odds, feeling discontent, feeling aggravated, feeling agitated. And that's all been a result of Koshai, of this division of the council field, we'll call it. Koshai Chataki Chashaki. And feeling this release through the abdominal ranges, this cramping here, Koshai, through the feminine, Koshai. Yes, again, massive retrieval, Chaho no Koya. And let's just look at this energy still through the heart here, where there's some kind of arachnid tone here, Koshai, pinned through the field. Chokoshai. This sense of it's coming through almost as this kill or be killed energy through the feminine range, Chokoshai, and into the left side of the brainstem. Okay, gosh. Also this feeling of like, well, if one person is right, it must mean the other is wrong. It's not that dramatic, right? But this is played out energetically, where everything can't be on the table and everything on the table can't be fully accepted. Good. Big clearing. Almost like there was a syringe, a needle, in the left side of the head here. This hypnotic effect, or hypnotizing effect. Well, not hypnotizing as much as, that energy of confusion. Okay, so if I'm feeling confused, I need to sort out the confusion, and yet not understanding the confusion itself was part of the manipulation in the field. That created this sense that something needed to be sorted and worked through, but would then lead to greater and greater distortion and ultimately destruction. Okay, good. Good. Oh, feeling this into the body now. Oh, this tension and tightness and pain. Particularly along the backside. Good. This is like the soul retrieval of soul retrievals. It almost starts to look like a pie, this round geometry which has all of these lines through it. So dividing, right? But this barrier, almost where the soul has been divided up here. Okay, so dropping out the Akash. The effects of, okay, it's whatever was put into the Akash to create this sense of barrier, or division, separation, inaccessible, good. Allowing all of the selves to be fully present and not at war with one another. The legionnaires of First Union, as it is so.